Okay, so we're looking at a literal paradigm shift in psychiatry right now. For most of the 20th century, the whole story around the pharmacology of depression was pretty much told in a single language, serotonin, and those daily pills designed to just sort of nudge it. But today, two wildly unlikely molecules, a battlefield anesthetic from the 1960s and the active compound in magic mushrooms, are completely rewriting the rules for how we treat the depressed brain. It's honestly wild to think that these two substances might be the exact things saving modern psychiatry.
Now, you might be wondering, and it's usually the very first question people ask, ketamine or psilocybin? Which one is actually better? Well, I want you to go ahead and erase that question from your mind entirely. Pitting them in some kind of head-to-head battle totally contradicts the incredibly complex neurological reality of what these compounds are actually doing. Looking for a single winner here, it just completely misses the magic of the neuroscience.
There's this fantastic quote from our source material today that really hits the nail on the head. It says, "This is not a contest to crown a winner. It is a study in contrast. Two doorways into the same wounded system, opening on to the same downstream repair." I absolutely love that. It brilliantly illustrates exactly how we need to approach this explainer. We're looking at two totally different keys that, against all odds, open the exact same lock.
Okay, let's dive into our roadmap. First, we'll look at this two doors, one room concept. Second, brain mechanisms and neuroplasticity. Third, the trade-off of speed versus durability. Fourth, clinical evidence and safety. And finally, legality and access in 2026.
Right, so Section 1, two doors, one room. Let's start with the microscopic view and look at exactly how these two molecules distinctly enter the brain. Over on one side, we've got ketamine. It's an NMDA receptor antagonist. What that means is it essentially blocks a specific receptor, basically taking the brakes off your brain's circuitry and causing this rapid surge of a chemical called glutamate. It acts like a highly targeted electrical jolt. Now, on the flip side, psilocybin arrives from a completely different direction. It's a 5-HT2A serotonin receptor agonist. So instead of a jolt, it increases neural entropy. Basically, it loosens up the tightly wound default mode network. You know those rigid circuits responsible for all our repetitive, anxious overthinking? It temporarily flattens out the brain's habitual grooves so new patterns can actually form. Literally, two completely different doorways.
Moving on to Section 2, brain mechanisms and neuroplasticity.
So despite taking those two entirely different doorways, one blocking glutamate receptors, the other lighting up serotonin receptors, they miraculously converge right here in BDNF-driven neuroplasticity. Both of these drugs funnel right into the exact same downstream repair mechanism. They promote the rapid, lasting growth of new dendritic spines and synaptic connections. They're literally teaching neurons to grow again. For a patient, this means the brain is physically rewiring itself to break out of those deep depressive ruts. Now, I do need to add an honest caveat here. While the whole plasticity restores mood idea is a highly compelling model in neuroscience right now, mapping exactly how that microscopic spine growth translates into a real person feeling hope again, well, that's still an ongoing scientific puzzle.
Which brings us to Section 3, speed versus treatment durability.
If the cellular mechanism is where they meet up, tempo is where they totally part ways. We're shifting from the cellular level to the macroscopic human experience now to explore a central trade-off. Think of ketamine as the hair. A single ketamine infusion can begin to lift severe depression in roughly 2 hours. 2 hours! That is genuinely without precedent in the entire history of psychiatry. If a patient is facing acute suicidality, waiting 6 weeks for a traditional SSRI pill to kick in simply isn't a viable option. Ketamine's speed makes it just an incredible, fast-acting rescue intervention.
But, the hair tires out pretty quickly. Ketamine's defining clinical burden is that a single dose typically fades within just 1 to 2 weeks if you don't repeat the dosing. This means that for the vast majority of patients, it isn't a one-and-done cure. It requires an open-ended commitment to maintenance dosing. And that reality brings significant logistical, financial, and physiological implications over time.
Psilocybin, on the other hand, total tortoise. Its onset doesn't announce itself in 2 hours. It takes days to integrate as the patient processes the acute psychological experience. But when it holds, it really holds. A discrete intervention, usually just a single session, or maybe 2 spaced out over a few weeks, combined with intensive psychological support before and after, can yield weeks to months of durability. It is a fundamentally different rhythm of treatment compared to ketamine's continuous maintenance.
All right, Section 4, clinical evidence and safety.
Where we look at their real-world clinical profiles, these two molecules are just sitting at totally different stages of the regulatory pipeline.
For ketamine, specifically the nasal spray Spravato, we saw a massive milestone when the FDA approved it as a standalone monotherapy for treatment-resistant depression in January 2025. It's an established, approved option. Psilocybin, conversely, is still investigational. Now, Compass Pathways did report highly positive Phase 3 data for their psilocybin treatment in 2025, and they're aggressively pursuing FDA submission. But as of right now, it's the ascending player, not yet an approved medicine.
We also have to talk honestly about safety, because it's a huge disservice to just label one as safe and the other as dangerous. Ketamine's tail risks accumulate primarily with repeated exposure. Because it's a Schedule III controlled substance, and frankly a known recreational drug, there's a genuine risk of abuse and dependence. Heavy, sustained use is directly linked to severe bladder toxicity, alongside cardiovascular strain and really intense episodes of dissociation.
Now for psilocybin, the dangers differ in kind, not degree. The sharpest risks really concentrate right in the acute session itself. We're talking about the signature bad trip or intense psychological distress. Plus, it's an absolute no-go, totally contraindicated for anyone with a personal or family history of psychosis or bipolar disorder, because it can actively trigger manic or psychotic episodes. And while it also transiently spikes your blood pressure, there is a theoretical heart valve risk if it were to be used chronically. That's exactly why treatments are structured around infrequent, highly supervised doses to mitigate that hazard.
And finally, Section 5, Legality and Access in 2026.
So, knowing all this incredible science, how do patients actually get these treatments today? Well, the asymmetry is honestly pretty stark. Ketamine is a legal medicine. You can access it via supervised IV clinics, that approved nasal spray we talked about, and increasingly through telehealth at-home prescriptions. And yeah, that telehealth expansion has absolutely widened reach, though it definitely raises serious concerns about underregulated markets and misuse. Psilocybin, however, remains a Schedule I substance at the federal level. The government currently classifies it as having no accepted medical use, making it highly restricted federally.
That being said, the map is definitely shifting at the state level. Oregon's already got licensed psilocybin service centers up and running. Colorado opened its first licensed healing centers back in April 2025. And New Mexico passed legislation to build a program targeting its initial patients by late 2026. But please keep in mind, these are incredibly strict state-level clinical frameworks for supervised use. This is absolutely not retail legalization where someone just walks in and buys it over the counter.
So, what is the core takeaway for us here? The choice isn't about which drug wins a gold medal. It's really all about fit. Step 1, urgency. If someone is in an acute crisis, speed absolutely favors ketamine. Step 2, comorbidities. A history of psychosis completely rules out psilocybin, while a history of addiction heavily flags ketamine. Step 3, setting. If a patient is ready and able to commit to an intensive, integrative, full-day psychological journey, well, that favors psilocybin.
And that brings us to what I think is the most fascinating frontier of all. We've seen how NMDA antagonism and 5-HT2A agonism converge beautifully on the exact same neuroplasticity. So I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. As neuroscience continues to evolve, how might these two very different keys one day be used in sequence? Perhaps one is a rapid rescue, the other is a durable anchor, rather than in opposition. It's just an absolutely incredible time for mental health science. Thanks so much for diving into this explainer with me.